The first time I saw her, I didn't know I'd be so aware of every little detail. I was just walking into my friend's house, expecting the usual casual hangout, video games, snacks, and easy conversation. Instead, I found myself paused in the hallway, noticing the way sunlight pooled on the polished wooden floor, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. And then she was there, my friend's mom, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, adjusting her apron with a grace that made the simplest movement feel deliberate. She was beautiful in a quiet, confident way, the kind of beauty that didn't shout but made you notice. Her hair, the color of rich chestnut, caught the sunlight when she tucked a loose strand behind her ear. Her eyes, warm yet playful, followed me as if she were trying to read me, teasingly aware of my awkwardness. I cleared my throat, fumbling with my backpack, and she tilted her head slightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're here for, friend's name?" she asked, her voice light but carrying a teasing undertone that made me immediately self-conscious. I nodded, suddenly aware of how hot my cheeks felt. There was a subtle scent lingering in the air, a mix of her perfume and the faint aroma of something baked fresh in the oven. It was comforting, yet it prickled at the edges of my nerves. As she walked past me into the kitchen, her fingers brushed lightly against my arm. It was an accidental touch, but long enough for a spark of warmth to travel through me. I tried to focus on anything else, the neatly stacked dishes, the sunlight glinting off the counter, but her presence had an almost magnetic weight. She bent to reach something on the lower shelf, and for a fleeting moment, I caught the curve of her profile against the warm kitchen light. She laughed softly at something my friend said from the living room, and the sound was full and genuine, filling the space in a way that made it impossible not to notice. She caught me looking, or at least I imagined she did, and she raised an eyebrow, still smiling, as if she'd caught me in some small act of admiration. There was a teasing energy in her gaze, a quiet challenge that made my stomach twist and my words catch in my throat. The rest of the visit blurred slightly casual conversation, her instructing me on where to put my shoes, her effortless way of moving through the kitchen, yet I kept replaying that first glance, the light touch on my arm, the soft laugh that seemed to linger in my mind long after it ended. It was a moment simple enough to pass unnoticed by anyone else, but for me, it planted a seed of curiosity, a flutter of awareness that this wasn't going to be just another ordinary day at my friend's house. By the time I left that evening, I was painfully conscious of the way her presence seemed to follow me, like a soft echo in the back of my mind. I didn't know it yet, but that brief encounter, her teasing tone, the warmth of her accidental touch, the quiet elegance in every gesture, had opened the door to something unfamiliar, subtle, and undeniably magnetic. After that first encounter, visiting my friend's house took on a new, almost magnetic pull. Suddenly, it wasn't just about hanging out with him anymore. There was her, calm, confident, and quietly observant, waiting in the kitchen or moving through the living room with effortless grace. Each time I came over, I found myself noticing small things, the way her hands moved when she poured tea, the slight crease near her eyes when she smiled, the soft warmth of her voice when she spoke. It began innocuously, as most things do. One afternoon, I offered to help her with a recipe she was trying out. She leaned close to guide my hands, adjusting my grip on a rolling pin. The touch was light, almost incidental, but my skin remembered it long after. The smell of fresh dough and warm vanilla surrounded us, comforting yet somehow intoxicating. "Careful," she teased, her lips curling into a soft smile, "you're too rough. You might ruin it." I laughed nervously, aware of how close we were, my shoulder brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Over the next few visits, these moments became small rituals. She taught me how to knead bread properly, how to slice vegetables with precision, even how to fold napkins neatly for a dinner. Each lesson was practical, yet there was an undercurrent of something else, a subtle playfulness in the way she corrected me, the way her fingers briefly lingered on mine when demonstrating a technique. Her eyes would sparkle with amusement when I fumbled, and I found myself wanting to do better, not just to impress her, but because the way she looked at me made me feel seen. Sometimes, our lessons bled into conversation. While chopping vegetables or arranging the kitchen table, she would tell me stories, small anecdotes about her life, her experiences, the quirks of her past. She spoke with a gentle confidence, but occasionally her tone softened, revealing moments of vulnerability. I listened intently, fascinated not only by what she said but by the subtle shifts in her expression, the way her gaze occasionally lingered on me as though weighing me. It was disarming, this quiet intimacy that grew between us, unnoticed by my friend or anyone else. And then there were the accidental touches, brushing against her arm when reaching for the same ingredient, the light pressure of her hand guiding mine, her fingers briefly lingering on my shoulder. Each contact was fleeting, but charged with warmth. Every laugh we shared, every small correction, every gentle nudge of encouragement left me acutely aware of her presence. I started noticing the tiny details, the softness of her sweater, the delicate scent of her perfume mingling with the kitchen aromas, the reassuring steadiness in her gestures. It was easy to get lost in these moments, and I did. The line between teacher and observer, between casual familiarity and something more, began to blur. I wasn't sure if it was admiration, curiosity, or something deeper stirring within me, but I knew one thing: I looked forward to these visits not just for the lessons, but for her. By the end of each afternoon, I left her kitchen with flour on my hands, a smile on my face, and a strange, lingering warmth that didn't fade. There was an unspoken connection forming, a slow-burning tension that neither of us acknowledged directly, but both of us felt. And somewhere deep down, I realized that I was beginning to care not for my friend's mom as an adult figure, not just as someone who taught me practical skills, but for the woman who saw me, challenged me, and somehow made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. It was one of those quiet evenings where the sunlight had faded, leaving only the soft glow of the kitchen lamp. The room smelled faintly of simmering soup, mingling with the lingering sweetness of freshly baked bread. I had come over under the pretense of helping my friend with homework, but as always, I ended up in the kitchen with her. This time, however, there was a different energy, one that made my chest tighten in a way I didn't fully understand. She leaned against the counter, her arms folded loosely, a contemplative look in her eyes. I noticed a subtle tension in her posture, the way her fingers played with the edge of her sleeve, and instinctively, I felt a desire to bridge the space between us, though I didn't yet know how. "You know," she began softly, almost as if speaking to herself, "sometimes people assume I have everything figured out, but it's not always like that." Her voice was gentle, tinged with a quiet sadness that caught me off guard. I hesitated, unsure if I should respond, but my own curiosity and some deeper instinct urged me to listen. She spoke then of small disappointments and quiet moments of loneliness, memories that shaped her but never defined her. Her eyes softened, and she glanced at me briefly, as if testing whether I would understand, whether I could hold this fragile part of her. I nodded, trying to offer silent reassurance without intruding. The normal rhythm of teasing and laughter that had marked our previous encounters faded, replaced by a tender, unspoken connection. At one point, I reached for the tea kettle, and our hands brushed accidentally. The contact was light, a fleeting touch, yet it sent a ripple of warmth through me. She noticed my pause and smiled faintly, not teasing this time, just acknowledging the moment with quiet grace. Her presence felt grounding, yet it stirred a strange mixture of comfort and something more complicated, an awareness I wasn't yet ready to name. As she shared these stories, I realized that her confidence wasn't a mask, it was a shield she carried carefully, one that only opened in moments of trust. Listening to her, I felt a new layer of intimacy forming, a bond built not on playful lessons or accidental touches, but on vulnerability and shared attention. I felt honored and, in a way, terrified by the trust she extended to me, a young man still navigating the edges of his own emotions. Our knees brushed under the table while she leaned to reach for a spice jar, a subtle, grounding connection. I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her, the soft cadence of her voice, and the way the light played across her features, highlighting the small lines that spoke of experience and quiet resilience. Each detail deepened the complexity of my feelings, layering admiration, affection, and something unspoken that hovered just beneath the surface. By the time I left that evening, the kitchen felt emptier than before, and yet the memory of her presence lingered, a warmth that settled in my chest. I knew, somehow, that this was different from before. It wasn't just curiosity or playful tension anymore, there was an emotional thread binding us, fragile but undeniable. And I realized, with a mixture of excitement and hesitation, that I wanted to be trusted by her again, to see more of the person beneath the confident smile, and to be part of the quiet moments that no one else witnessed. The following weeks were a strange blend of anticipation and restraint. Every time I went over to my friend's house, I found myself noticing her in ways I hadn't before: the graceful tilt of her head when she listened, the subtle warmth in her voice, the quiet way she moved through the space as if she owned it without needing to prove it. Yet alongside this fascination, a weight of hesitation pressed on me, heavy and constant. I couldn't ignore the fact that she was my friend's mother. The thought alone made my stomach twist with guilt, and I found myself analyzing every interaction, every glance, every accidental touch. Was I imagining the subtle sparks, or was there really something more in her warm smile? The tension built silently, a tightrope between curiosity and propriety, and each time we were together, I felt the challenge of balancing admiration with respect. She noticed, of course I could tell. Not openly, not with teasing words, but in the way her eyes lingered on mine a little longer than necessary, in the gentle guidance of my hands while we cooked, or the way she would lightly brush my shoulder when correcting my posture. These small gestures were brief, almost casual, but they carried an intimacy that I hadn't felt before. Every accidental brush of skin, every faint touch, made me acutely aware of the age gap and the delicate boundary we weren't supposed to cross. One afternoon, as I reached for a spice jar, our fingers touched for a fraction of a second. My pulse spiked. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable, a mixture of amusement and something softer, more personal. I quickly looked away, fumbling with the jar as my mind raced. I wondered, was I reading too much into it? Was she simply being kind, guiding me through the kitchen tasks as she always had? Or was there an unspoken acknowledgement in her touch that neither of us would voice? Despite the tension, there was a strange comfort in her presence. When she leaned close to show me a trick with the knife, the faint scent of her perfume mingled with the aroma of fresh herbs, grounding me. Her hand brushed mine lightly, guiding me, and I felt a warmth spread from my shoulder down to my chest. It was electric, but restrained. She wasn't crossing a line, and neither was I, yet the awareness of that restraint made every moment sharper, more alive. I spent the evenings replaying our interactions in my head, analyzing every nuance, every glance, every smile. The emotional push and pull created a quiet tension, a tug-of-war between desire and reason. I wanted to linger, to feel her near me a little longer, but I also knew the importance of caution. My admiration had deepened into something more complex, something that required patience and discretion. By the time I left her home each day, I carried both the warmth of her presence and the weight of my hesitation. The small touches, the shared laughter, the subtle guidance, all of it lingered in my mind, leaving me exhilarated and uncertain. I was learning to navigate the delicate line between affection and propriety, discovering that connection didn't need to rush to define itself, and that sometimes, the tension itself could be as meaningful as the touch. It was one of those rare afternoons when the house was quiet, my friend out running errands and the sun dipping low enough to filter golden light through the curtains. I had come over ostensibly to help with dinner, but I quickly realized that these visits had become about more than just meals or casual conversation. Her presence had a gravitational pull, one I couldn't ignore, no matter how carefully I tried. She moved around the kitchen with her usual effortless grace, chopping vegetables and humming softly, a tune that seemed to wrap itself around the stillness in the room. I watched her, noticing the slight curve of her smile as she worked, the way her sleeves rolled up to reveal toned forearms, and the faint, natural scent of her perfume that mixed with the aroma of fresh herbs. Even the simple act of her brushing a strand of hair behind her ear felt intimate, almost mesmerizing. "Careful with that knife," she said, leaning closer to guide my hand. Her fingers grazed mine, light and fleeting, but my chest tightened at the contact. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the world had narrowed to just the space between us, where every glance and gesture carried weight. She didn't pull back immediately, letting our hands hover together for a fraction longer than necessary, her touch deliberate but gentle. I laughed nervously, trying to mask the awareness building inside me, but she caught my eye and tilted her head slightly, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. It wasn't teasing this time, it was softer, warmer, like an acknowledgement of something unspoken between us. For a fleeting moment, I felt seen in a way that went beyond admiration or curiosity. It was a recognition of my hesitation, my awareness of boundaries, and my growing feelings for her. We continued cooking, side by side, but the energy had shifted. There were small, lingering touches, our shoulders brushing as we reached for the same pot, her hand briefly resting on my back as she guided me toward the counter, the warmth of her presence drawing me in even as my mind reminded me of the social rules I shouldn't break. Each accidental connection was charged, each shared laugh a subtle affirmation that we were comfortable with one another in a way that felt personal, rare, and significant. Later, as we plated the meal, she leaned in close to adjust the arrangement, and the soft brush of her hand against mine lingered longer than necessary. My pulse raced, not from fear or recklessness, but from the intensity of proximity, the quiet intimacy of shared space and shared tasks. There was no need for words, the silence between us was full, a gentle acknowledgement of attention neither of us dared name aloud. When I finally left that evening, I walked away with the memory of her warmth, the soft light on her face, and the subtle thrill of connection tucked deep inside me. The tension hadn't broken, it had deepened. It wasn't about crossing lines or seizing the moment, it was about presence, about closeness, and about the quiet thrill of being near someone who understood, without judgment, the complexity of the feelings forming between us. For the first time, I realized that these ordinary tasks, chopping vegetables, plating meals, adjusting napkins, had become extraordinary simply because of her. And I knew I wanted more of these moments, where silence, touch, and glances could speak louder than any words ever could. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves through the slightly open kitchen window. The house was quiet, the only sounds the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. I had come over again under the pretense of helping clean up after dinner, but there was an energy I couldn't ignore, a tension that had been building over weeks, subtle and persistent, waiting for its moment. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching me stack dishes with a calm attentiveness that made my heart race without reason. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the space that had been growing between our silent glances and light touches. But the words felt heavy, dangerous even, weighed down by social boundaries and the knowledge that she was my friend's mother. Finally, I set the last dish down and met her gaze. The light from the lamp above reflected softly in her eyes, warm and knowing. She tilted her head slightly, a small, encouraging smile tugging at her lips, as if she sensed what I was struggling to express. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and for the first time, I allowed myself to step closer, not recklessly, but with intention. I enjoy being here, I began, my voice quieter than I expected. With you. I mean, not just for the cooking or the lessons. I like spending time with you. The words felt awkward leaving my mouth, but the truth was unshakable. My chest felt tight with anticipation and fear of overstepping, fear of rejection, fear of misreading her intentions. She didn't respond immediately, simply watched me with those steady, observant eyes. Then she moved slightly closer, her hand brushing my forearm lightly, the touch deliberate and grounding. I enjoy it too, she said softly, her voice warm and sincere. I like your company, and I'm flattered, of course. But we both know there are complexities here. There was no teasing, no playful glint, just honesty. Her acknowledgement of both our connection and its boundaries made my heart ache and swell at the same time. We stood there, side by side, close enough that I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her, yet careful not to cross the invisible line. It was a delicate dance of emotional honesty, a moment suspended between desire and respect. I realized then that what mattered most wasn't forcing anything, but sharing this truth, that our connection, fragile, unusual, and intense, was real, mutual, and meaningful. Her hand lingered on my arm a fraction longer than necessary, a gentle reassurance that our bond was acknowledged without needing to be named in full. We can't rush this, she whispered, but it doesn't mean it isn't real. And in that moment, I understood the emotional intimacy we shared, the playful touches, the lingering glances, the quiet afternoons, they all mattered. They had created something rare and profound, even if it existed in a space where words could only hint at its depth. When I left that night, the air outside felt sharper, cooler, but inside me was a warmth that lingered long after the door closed. The confession hadn't dissolved the tension, it had transformed it. What had been silent curiosity and hesitant admiration had become a mutual recognition, an understanding of feelings that couldn't be fully acted upon yet didn't need to be. For the first time, I felt the thrill and the comfort of being truly seen by someone extraordinary. The next few weeks passed in a delicate rhythm. Our interactions settled into a new pattern, one infused with understanding and quiet acknowledgement of what had been confessed. We no longer needed words to define the connection, it was woven into the small gestures, the fleeting touches, and the shared moments of everyday life. Every visit carried a subtle warmth, a closeness that was both exhilarating and grounding. One afternoon, I arrived to find her sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, the sunlight casting a soft halo around her hair. She looked up and smiled as I entered, that same gentle, knowing smile that had first caught me off guard weeks ago. It was neither teasing nor provocative, simply a quiet welcome that made me feel at home in her presence. We moved into the kitchen to prepare a simple snack together, our shoulders brushing lightly as we worked side by side. There was laughter, easy and natural, and a few brief, meaningful touches, her hand resting lightly on my arm as she handed me a plate, the warmth of her palm lingering just long enough to remind me of the bond we had nurtured. It was comforting, reassuring, and profoundly tender. At one point, she paused and looked at me with an expression that was both affectionate and reflective. "You've grown so much," she said softly. "Not just in the kitchen, but in how you see the world, how you understand people. I'm glad I've been able to share some of that with you." Her words carried weight, not just for the lessons themselves, but for the emotional intimacy we had built together. I felt a surge of gratitude and something deeper, a quiet admiration that ran both ways. As the afternoon faded into evening, we shared a moment of silence, sitting across from each other with a small table between us. Our knees brushed beneath it, and her eyes met mine with a warmth that needed no words. It was a subtle acknowledgement that what we shared was unique, meaningful, and cherished, even if it existed within the boundaries of reality and social expectation. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence, understanding, and mutual respect. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Our hands met in a gentle, lingering touch, the kind that conveyed care, connection, and unspoken affection. "Take care," she said softly, and I nodded, feeling the depth of her sincerity. Outside, the cool air wrapped around me, but inside my chest there was a warmth that stayed long after I stepped away. In the days that followed, our bond continued to grow in subtle, meaningful ways. We shared quiet afternoons, small lessons, laughter, and confidences. The tension that had once been electric had softened into a gentle, comforting closeness, a connection built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. It was a slow-burn romance, not defined by dramatic gestures or societal expectations, but by shared presence and quiet emotional intimacy. By the time the story reached its natural close, I realized that the most extraordinary moments had been the simplest: the accidental touches, the lingering glances, the shared laughter, and the quiet acknowledgement of feelings that didn't need to be fully named to be real. As I walked away from her house one final time that week, I carried more than memories of playful lessons or fleeting touches. I carried the warmth of connection, the comfort of understanding, and the quiet, enduring thrill of a bond that had grown slowly, sincerely, and beautifully, a bond that neither time nor circumstance could diminish.